So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Coley and TR. Coley and TR are third-generation dairy farmers with a passion for sharing their family farm's history and advocating for agriculture. In June of 2019, the Jones family opened a creamery to direct market their own milk and premium ice cream. As part of their business model, they have a 1 for 10 gallon give back promise to donate 1 gallon of milk for every 10 that they sell. Currently, TR manages the dairy farm alongside his wife Brittany and father Hugh, and Coley manages the creamery. You can find them on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok to learn more. And I know TR can tell us a lot about TikTok. Welcome, Coley and TR. It's great to have you here today. I suspect everyone's ears perked up when I said premium ice cream. So let's jump right into that and how that all got started. Can you tell us a little bit about the history of Richlands and how the creamery came to be?
Well, T, do you want to take the history and I'll take the creamery?
Sure. Family farms, the farm's been in our family since around the 1750s, but didn't become a dairy until the 1950s. That was our grandfather. When he came back to run the farm, he just decided that he thought dairy was the direction he wanted to take it. He, I think as much as anything, did not enjoy tobacco farming at all. I think the tar and the long days. And just, it's the direction he wanted to go. So he converted the farm to a dairy in the 50s. He ran in the 70s, and he's running, and he's still there till today. So that's kind of a brief family history. And then on the farm, I guess as far as family is still there today. Coley and I both there, like she said, we're third generation farmers. My wife works on the farm with us. We have I guess you would say a second cousin helps on the farm, as well as 4 other employees. And our grandmother still lives on the farm in the original farmhouse. So that's kind of the history of where we were, where we are. And I guess to transition to Coley in 2017, 2018, kind of had a writing on the wall that we needed to do something to make sure we could still be here in the future. And so that's where the creamery came in. So I'm going to pass it off to Coley, let her take over.
Yeah, so to understand why we decided to go with the creamery, you kind of need to understand the way we sell milk, as do most dairy farms in the United States. You sell to a milk cooperative and you have no bargaining power for what you get paid for milk. You take whatever the market is giving you. So, I mean, we know what our cost of production is for milk, and it's not like we can say it cost us X, we want to be paid Y, so we make Z in profit. That's just not the way that, quite frankly, most of farming works. And so it got to a point where medium-sized dairies like ours just weren't able to make it, and they were selling out at a pretty rapid pace in the United States. And we were in that boat. I mean, we were losing money every month. And so we got together as a family to decide, well, what are we going to do? I mean, one option is we could sell out. The second option is we could go bigger, try to be 1,000 or more cows and gain those efficiencies of scales that the larger dairies do. Or we change the business model to one where we can control what we get paid for milk and market our own products and add value to it, so that we can increase profit and cash flow. And ultimately, and for several reasons, we ended up deciding on the creamery. So we invested almost $2 million into building a creamery that would be able to. You should also know raw milk is illegal in the sale of raw milk is illegal to sell in the state of Virginia. So for us to sell our milk directly to consumers, we had to invest in pasteurizing equipment to do that. And it's not like you can just buy a little pasteurizer and sort of test the waters. You're either all in or you're all out. And so we did the math, and we visited a bunch of creameries and other farms who were doing this. And you don't make your profit in milk. You make your profit when you value add. And so for us, that value add that made sense was ice cream, because we were also doing farm tours and really opening up the farm and inviting people to come on. So we had a pretty good agritourism business going as well, which really helped us out because we had a customer base before we ever had a product to sell them. So, our market, our consumer base is generally families with younger children, or sort of that, the grandparents' age who remember growing up on the farm, or whose mom or dad grew up on the farm and they had that connection. So that's how the creamery came to be.
Great, thank you for that. And jumping right in, getting back to what we were talking about with your 1 to 10 promise. On Richlands' website, you state, "We promise to do good within our community." And Blackstone, the surrounding area, is such a tight-knit community. Can you tell us about how that promise prompted the 1 for 10 gallon give back program and how that idea got started?
So it was actually I'll let TR speak to this. I kind of hand it off to him. It wasn't the promise that prompted it. It was actually it wasn't the idea of doing good within the community that prompted it. It was actually the promise that prompted I can't think of it right now. Our slogan or I can't think of it. Anyway, TR, tell them about how we came up with the 1 for 10 gallon give back promise.
So, I mean, this is kind of a story of you just don't know how the world's going to turn out. Several years before we opened the Creamery, our father, Coley, and I did a Bible study at our local church. And in that Bible study, part of it, we were doing cover to cover Bible study over a summer. And for whatever section we were studying, it was on tithing and giving back to the community. And I scribbled in the front of my Bible study manual that if we ever made it big in farming somehow, that we'd partner with somebody and somehow, give 10% back to whatever shelters, entities we could to help our community grow. Another thing, I guess, at the time, maybe to complete this puzzle at the time, Tom Shoes, if you've ever heard of that, they were becoming a big thing, where you buy a pair of shoes and they give a pair of shoes to, a family need and anywhere in the world. But also, Midas of Richmond was running a lot of deals where if you came and got an oil change, they would donate a certain amount of money to feed more in Richmond. And so kind of having those ideas in my head while in that Bible study, and I think we maybe had vaguely started to talk about doing a Creamery. Just kind of all those puzzle pieces fell together that, if this ever does happen, it really takes off. Let's give back to our community and just make that part of our business model. At some point in my mind, it was kind of, if we ever find some success, but as we set it up, and I'll let Coley take over again. I mean, from us being ambitious right out the gate, Coley wanted to go ahead and build it into the business model, day one. And so we did. And, it wasn't just at that point, it wasn't just taking that leap to go out and start a business. It was also taking that leap to go out and start a business that would also help the community grow, even if it was taking, I guess, what you would consider profit away from the business. But I guess our mindset is that if you want people to support you, you have to support the people around you as well. And so that's kind of the way we looked at it. But Coley, you take it away on why you wanted to implement it immediately.
Yeah, so like TR said, we wanted to be a blessing to our community, but we'd already talked about this idea of giving 10%. And I just, I guess at several Farm Bureau meetings, I'd heard, or through the Dairy Alliance, that one of the most requested items at food banks was milk, and it's rarely ever donated because it's a perishable item. And so it was like, well, we can't. After investing almost $2 million in the Creamery, we obviously don't have money to give, and we've been losing money on the farm for a while, but we have milk. We have an excess of milk. And what would it really take to just say, that 1 for 10 is that tithe? We sell 10 gallons of milk, we're going to tithe a tenth of that out. And so we just built that into the business model to start. And that thought actually helped us establish our mission statement where we promise to do good. So, we may not be able to, if you ask us for a donation, we may not be able to give money. But if you have a family that needs milk, we'll give them milk. So, we just built it in when we started. It just felt like the right thing to do.
Yeah. And the gallon give back as well as the mission statement are both written very plainly in the Creamery when you come in. And we hope that people, there it's on the shirt. We hope that people know when they're patronizing the Creamery and the business, that they also know they're supporting in turn their local community, because when they buy those gallons, they add up, and that's what we're basing our donation off of. So,
That's great. Coley, I think we're all going to need one of those shirts after this. I love that. And, you both have mentioned many times community and how important it is for you to be involved in the community and for the community to know that you support them as much as they support you. But for y'all on Richlands, your community is not just the physical people around you. Y'all are, nothing short of social media stars on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. I mean, particularly TR and TikTok. I know we could have a whole webinar just on that. What does it mean to you to have that type of widespread social media community?
Okay, you go first, TR.
I guess I'll start. To reach people today, you have to keep up with trends, and social media is, whether it's a trend, whether it's around to stay long term, it's definitely what is in right now. I mean, there's nobody. I mean, maybe there is, but most people are at least on one form, if not 3 or 4 forms of social media. Facebook.
All right.
TR, you're muted. Can you unmute yourself?
A second.
There we go.
Okay, what was the last thing you heard? I got kicked out for a little bit.
You were talking about the importance of everything being on trend and having to communicate via social media. Oh, we lost him.
Okay, well, I'll jump in with my answer then while he gets back on. It's to me, it's a double-edged sword. I think what TR was saying is it's necessary, and it's definitely a great marketing tool because it helps us connect with people and tell our story. And really, people want, especially consumers today, they want to know that story. They want to know where their food comes from. They want to connect to a farmer. They want to visit the farm. They want to know their farmers. And so social media is a great way to do that. It's a great way to market out events. There are many positives to social media. The downside to that is if you do something wrong, you better believe it's going to spread faster than if you do something right. And it's kind of terrifying in that regard. I mean, we're always striving to do the best we can, provide the best customer service, but it doesn't matter how many great reviews you have or how loyal you're following. One person can come in and do a tremendous amount of damage. And the best example I have of that, and one of the things that's truly terrifying about social media and that we deal with on a regular basis, more so TR and Brittany now, is animal rights activist group. I mean, it's just as much a platform for them, if not more so, and they have more time. They're not out dairy farming, spending a majority of their day, taking care of animals and land. They have plenty of time to sit in front of a computer and just attack you. And so that can be, and then just spread a smear campaign. And so it's terrifying to think that what if, and as diligent as we are about new hires and doing background checks and seeing if there's, anything sketchy there, what if an animal rights activist makes it onto the farm and stages something and posts that video and that goes viral? Then it doesn't matter that it's false. It doesn't matter that that is not how we run our farm. It doesn't matter all the time and effort that we've invested into telling our story. It's not going to matter. That negative is going to take over faster than anything else. So to me, social media, it's great, and I'm leery of it. But back to you, T.
But I am kind of losing serving and all the so I guess gotten into social media on an app called TikTok. Just started telling the farm story in 60-second segments, and people, I think, they just don't get to see farm life very often. So started following, and I think also intrigued by the story of the farm and the obstacles we've been trying to overcome ever since we built the creamery, really, or even the road to building the creamery. But have been fortunate to garner a.
Oh, I think we lost him again. But
yeah.
Real quick, Coley, going back to, I want to pick up on something that you mentioned, with talking about animal care and animal rights activists. For those of us who didn't grow up on a dairy farm, can you give us just a quick overview of what it's like to care for dairy cows?
It takes a tremendous amount of time and energy. You're out there 365 days a year. It doesn't matter the weather. It doesn't matter the working conditions. I mean, if you're going to be a dairy farmer or farmer of any animal, then you are committed to the care of that animal. And that's something that we take very seriously. If you're not familiar with the dairy industry, I can tell you our cows have better health care, they have better housing, and they probably have better nutrition than a majority of the world's population. And once people come onto the farm and they take the tour and they see all of those things and come to understand, these cows are spoiled. And at most, they work for maybe 2 hours a day, and they get a 2-month vacation on average every 10 to 11 months. I would take that work schedule. And once people understand that, they're like, oh, dairy is actually pretty cool. You can feel good about where your milk comes from.
I definitely want to come back as a dairy cow in my next life, that's for sure. Well, thank you for that, Colleen TR. I hate to stop you because I know we could talk about dairy cows all night here, but we are going to bring you both back a little bit later on in our panel discussion. But for now, I want to switch over to our next panelist, Eddie Oliver. To introduce Eddie here, Eddie is the Executive Director of the Federation of Virginia Food Banks. Under his leadership, the 7 regional food banks serving the Commonwealth are working together to improve access to nutritious food for all Virginians. Prior to his start with the Federation in January 2018, Mr. Oliver served as the No Kid Hungry Virginia State Director, leading the statewide campaign to increase participation in federal child nutrition programs in partnership with First Lady Dorothy McAuliffe. His efforts led to an annual increase of 10 million school breakfasts and 2 million after-school meals and snacks served to Virginia students. For the past 3 years, he's worked with a broad range of partners across the Commonwealth to build a better food system that works for everyone, and is continuing that mission by leading the collaborative priorities for Virginia's food banks. Eddie, welcome, and thank you for being here with us tonight. And after reading your bio and hearing some about your past work, I'm really interested in hearing what you're working on now. So can you tell us a little bit about the Federation and its mission?
Thanks, Stephanie. Appreciate being here with all of you this evening. I'm sorry y'all have to hear from me now. I could have sat here and listened to the Richlands story for another hour. Y'all do really great work, and glad to have you as a partner with the Food Bank Network. The mission of the Federation is really to grow the collective capacity of our emergency food system and engage partners to ultimately end hunger in Virginia. It's pretty simple. It's really founded on the premise that the whole is stronger than the sum of its parts. We have 7 regional Feeding America food banks in Virginia. Each of them has their own distinct service area that they're responsible for. And they have anywhere from a few dozen to several hundred partners that they work with. And those are your local church pantries, your homeless shelters, soup kitchens, etc. So we really act as I compare it to like your Walmart or Target distribution center. That's the food bank. We can take truckloads of food. We have huge warehouses. And then we ship that food out to the stores, the pantries, where people who need food assistance can go. And the 7 food banks, we work really well together. We're very collaborative. We learn a lot from each other. We still are very focused on the basics of the food bank mission, which has always been to move food that may be going to waste, prevent it from going to waste, and move it to people who need it, who have fallen on hard times. And that's still very much the core of what we do, but we're always getting more sophisticated. So we're able to we have programs that specifically serve seniors, that serve homebound folks, that serve children. There are, I think it's 450,000 kids who rely on free and reduced meals at school. But there are gaps, right? I mean, even when schools haven't been closed for a pandemic, there are weekends, there are school breaks, there's summer. And so food banks are very focused on how we can strategically identify where the greatest need is and get new innovative programs, summer meal programs, after school meal programs. We have weekend backpack programs. And my favorite is school pantries, which is relatively new. But food banks can either bring a truckload of food to a school. You advertise the distribution time in advance to all the school families. They can show up and get fresh produce, really nutritious food. Or some schools even have a pantry that's available year round. So anytime there's a student whose family might be in crisis or in need, they can access food right there in a safe environment. And that program has all kinds of tangential benefits where, school staff might be seeing parents who they never see come in. You can talk about services. You can talk about how the child's doing in school. And so that's just one example. We're starting to work more with community colleges. We're working with healthcare partners to screen people in clinic settings for food security, and then refer them to nutrition programs because we know food is medicine. Food's really critical to people's overall health and well-being. So a lot going on, but it's all good stuff, and we really rely on partnerships. And the partnerships we have with the agriculture sector here in Virginia and our farmers is really critical, and I'm looking forward to discussing that a little bit more later.
Great. Thank you for that background, that introduction. That really does set the stage for our panel discussion coming up later. So we're definitely going to hear more from Eddie and his thoughts about those partnerships and how we all can be strategic to address these issues. So thank you for that, Eddie. And now I'd like to introduce Senator Ghazala Hashmi. Senator Hashmi, PhD, serves in the Virginia General Assembly, representing the 10th Senatorial District, which includes parts of Richmond City, Chesterfield County, and all of Powhatan County. She sits on the following Senate committees: Education and Health, Agriculture, Conservation and Natural Resources, General Laws and Technology, and Local Government. Senator Hashmi also chairs the Senate Subcommittee on Public Education. As an experienced educator and advocate who spent nearly 30 years working within Virginia's college and university system, she identifies education, equity, the environment, and healthcare access as top legislative priorities. Senator Hashmi was elected to office in November 2019, unseating the Republican incumbent and helping to bring an historic Democratic majority to the state Senate and to the General Assembly. Prior to her election, she served as the founding director of the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning at Reynolds Community College in Richmond, Virginia. She's the first Muslim American to serve in the Virginia Senate. Welcome, Senator Hashmi, and we're so glad you could join us tonight.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Delighted to be here. Thank you.
Now, during the 2021 General Assembly session, you sponsored legislation to establish the Virginia Agriculture Food Assistance Program for Virginia farmers and food producers to donate or sell agriculture products to charitable food assistance organizations. The legislation, which passed the General Assembly and was signed by Governor Northam, also creates a fund to disperse money to those charitable food assistance organizations to reimburse farmers or food producers for any costs associated with harvesting, processing, packaging, or transporting, donating those agriculture products. What prompted you to become involved with the issues that this legislation seeks to address?
Well, thank you for that question. And I think, you've already heard from Eddie, who has established such wonderful partnerships. And so part of the legislation, my journey towards this legislation really involves Eddie and his leadership as well. But I just want to think back a little bit to where we were last March and April. And that is when we saw Virginia go into lockdown, a good part of the country going into the lockdown, and really a large part of the globe experiencing this pandemic crisis. And so 1 year ago, we saw the sudden loss of jobs, loss of income for so many Virginia families. And that was a moment of crisis and also a moment of clarity for a lot of us. We realized that we had to jump into action and that there was so much that needed to be done in order to stabilize our communities all across Virginia. We knew that housing insecurity was going to be a critical crisis as so many families faced the possibility of evictions They couldn't pay rent, mortgage anymore. And coupled with that, of course, is food insecurity, growing crisis in food insecurity. We knew that as schools shut down, as Eddie pointed out, we had a lot of hungry children that needed to continue to be fed, not just on weekends and holidays now, but also through the regular school day. And all of that effort required logistical planning and making sure we could deliver food to these families. So my interest really began almost immediately around April. I was working with a volunteer network with the Islamic Circle of North America. And this was a massive organizational effort to try to get food distributed across the Commonwealth. We had a mosque here in the Central Virginia area that was organizing this on a bi-weekly basis. And in my volunteer efforts, we would actually collect all the food on Friday night, sort and package it into boxes on Saturday, and then spend Sunday delivering it to individuals' houses because people could not really get out and mingle in the lockdown. So we were actually going to various houses and dropping off the food. And that really opened my eye to the growing crisis that we had here. Certainly, there were a lot of low-income communities that needed the food. We were going to zip codes that represented some of our most impoverished communities. But at the same time, I was also going to zip codes that were right next to where I live. And they were middle-class families who suddenly faced a food crisis, a hunger crisis. They needed assistance. So this is a massive impact on so many Virginian families. And so at that point, I really began thinking about what our next steps would be legislatively to help shore up our programs, make sure we had food that was consistent and delivered to the families who most needed it. And this is where Eddie comes into the picture. So my staff and I began conversations with Eddie since we had been thinking along similar lines. And he had also begun this very critical work. I was also working with a young student advocacy group, the Greater Good Initiative, young folks who are in college. They had come up with a farm to food banks proposal as well. And we knew that this was a solid idea that would be able to help not just our folks who are facing food insecurity, but also critically important that it was going to help Virginia farmers as well. Virginia farmers needed the same assistance, and what a great collaborative partnership this could be to help our farming families and also help the families who are facing hunger issues. So it just worked out wonderfully, and I'm so delighted that we had the support in the General Assembly. We had the support from the governor's administration. It was in the budget, and we were able to get the legislation through. So look forward to talking a little bit further about it as we continue this conversation tonight.
Great, thank you for that perspective. And it really is such a creative idea to tackle those costs that can be prohibitive to farmers donating products, the harvesting, the transporting, the packaging. So I really commend you and Eddie for getting together and working on that. That's a great idea that we're sure to talk about a little bit more later. Next, we're going to hear from Delegate Wendy Goditis. Delegate Goditis is a member of the Virginia House of Delegates in District 10. She represents parts of Clark, Frederick, and Loudoun counties. She is Vice Chair of the House Committee on Agriculture, Chesapeake, and Natural Resources, and she sits on the House Committees on Labor and Commerce and County, Cities, and Towns. Additionally, the delegate is Chair of the Interstate 81 Committee and serves on the Center for Rural Virginia Board of Trustees, among other appointments. Delegate Goditis focuses on a wide range of issues, including public health, agriculture, the environment, and child welfare. Before serving her community in public office, Delegate Goditis worked as a teacher, real estate agent, and technologist. Delegate Goditis lives in Millwood, Virginia with her husband, 6 horses, and 2 Rhodesian Ridgebacks. Welcome, Delegate Goditis. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Stephanie. It's always a pleasure. And as Stephanie knows, I am a passionate lover of dairy farms, and I loved hearing those stories. It was part of my childhood where I grew up and part of my college experience, and the highest respect and love for dairy farmers. And it was my great honor and pleasure to give our dairy farmers in Virginia a little bit of help this year. So thank you for what you do.
Yes, we certainly appreciate you sponsoring that legislation this year. Speaking of legislation, Speaker Eileen Fillicorn sponsored the House version of Virginia Agriculture Food Assistance Program legislation that we just talked about, and you were chief co-patron of the legislation. What impact do you think the legislation will have on farmers and communities in your district?
Well, so the district I represent is largely agriculture. It's varied agriculture. We have a lot of agritourism. We now have a lot of wineries and breweries, but we have a lot of beef. Dairy is just, I think we have just a few dairies left in this whole district, which is heartbreaking. But this legislation was so perfect. Thank you so much, Senator Hashmi, to help the two sets of people to help the people who feed us and to help the people who need to be fed. It could not be more perfect. Statistics. So we in the General Assembly, we put $600,000 into the budget for these grants. So $600,000 to help farmers feed people. And in my district, Loudoun, Clark, and Frederick counties, we have wonderful food pantries. Some of them are in our religious institutions, some of them are not. There's Loudoun Hunger Relief in Loudoun County, Highland Pantry in Winchester, Fish in Clark County. All of these groups do an amazing job. And as the Senator pointed out, during COVID, those numbers just absolutely skyrocketed. And another side issue of COVID was that the number of people, often retired people, who could go to the food pantries and hand out food, that number dropped. That doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the legislation, just with the problems of getting people fed. I like to help out at a food pantry in Winchester, and I'm the food item. This is 3 huge boxes and a huge bag of potatoes that people pull up in their cars and get, and it feeds a family for a week. And the shortest supply is always the produce and the milk. So how perfect is it to encourage and actually pay farmers to supply that, which is always in short supply. So this is going to be good for everyone across the county, across all 3 counties. I look forward to hearing on the ground in the pantry where I help that I look forward to the day when I hear that farmers are actually able to bring in more produce, and I am actually able to pack boxes with it. But all I can say is it was a real honor. The speaker asked me to sort of guide it through the House. The speaker's name was on it, but I had the honor of guiding it through. And to me, it's one of the great things we have done.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. And it's good to hear that you're the eyes and ears on the ground too as well. That was a great introduction from all of our panelists, some of the topics we're going to talk about as a group. So I really appreciate that intro. We're going to bring everyone now back together. I've got a couple more questions for the panel, and I'll direct them to one person, but everyone please feel free to jump in with your thoughts as we go on. I'll start with Eddie. Eddie, you've mentioned some of our conversations and also in your opening remarks about wanting the Federation of Virginia Food Banks to be strategic about where we get food from. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, and I think a little bit of history is helpful for the current context. So modern food banking, the way it looks now, is a relatively recent development. It was started by a gentleman named John Van Hingel in Arizona back in the late 60s. And the story goes, I'm assuming this is accurate, the story goes that he noticed there were quite a few people near this homeless shelter where he was volunteering at who were going dumpster diving behind the local grocery store. And he figured there had to be a way to rescue that food before it went into the dumpster and serve people with more dignity. And so he started a food bank there in Phoenix, and the model just really took off across the country. And so that's traditionally been how we think about food banking is we go out and we talk to grocery stores, we talk to large manufacturers and say, look, whenever you guys have damaged food or food that you think isn't going to sell in time, we even got to the point with flash freezing equipment that we could take meat that was approaching its sell-by date, freeze it, and move it through the network pretty quickly. Go and say, if you have any food is going to go to waste, please give it to us and we'll distribute it. Well, that really put us at the mercy of whatever food happened to be available. And unfortunately, a lot of that wasn't always the most nutritious. It's often our shelf-stable food is often our most processed food. And so we felt like we really needed to get smarter about what kind of food we were moving through the system and giving to people who are in need, because they deserve quality food just as much as the rest of us do. And of course, there are all kinds of health problems that are associated with that, and it becomes kind of a self-perpetuating cycle at that point. And so over the last, I'd say 5 to 10 years, food banks all over the country and Virginia, we're really trying to lead the way on this front. We're we're fundraising, we're developing programs like Milk for Good, which you can learn more about on our website, which, as Coley mentioned, is designed to raise money because milk is not donated very often because it's perishable. And so when we can go out and use these funds to purchase food, we can buy food that we know is nutritious, vitamin rich, and is hard for people to find anywhere else. And so the more we do that, of course, we can be strategic about where we're buying it from. And we want to do that in a way that recognizes food banks are part of the larger food system, and where we can support Virginia farmers. We support the overall economy, means we're supporting good paying jobs, and hopefully there are ultimately fewer people in our pantry lines. And we think that should be part of the goal, is not just feeding the line, but ultimately ending the line. And so that's important to us. And just speaking to the bill, and I really appreciate Delegate Goditis and Senator Hashmi's leadership. Farmers in Virginia are so generous, and we know of so many who want to donate excess product when they have it available, but over and over again, we've heard the barrier was just these fixed costs that come with harvesting the product or processing it. And so this new bill is going to create a reliable funding stream where we can go out and have those conversations now and be ready, so that when things like, COVID happened, when suddenly there's a loss in the market, you don't have these institutions buying food anymore, we have those funds available to very quickly rescue product out of the field and get it to where it needs to go and feed people who are in need. So we're very, very excited about the potential of that bill.
So follow up to that, and this is for anyone, maybe particularly for Coley and TR, but what advice would you have for farmers who are looking to donate fresh products? Where do you start?
I was actually just sitting here thinking about the tithing thing that we talked about earlier, and the thing that keeps running through my mind is you don't tithe out of your excess, you tithe out of what you have. And so part of it, I guess, for us especially, was just taking that leap of, if you give what you have, like the good Lord asks, he's going to bless you. So I think part of it is just have faith that when you support your community, and we do advertise that we do this, we let it be known, but we also don't gloat about it either. So we have this program, we're giving back to our community. If you'd like to join us, that's great, but we're doing it because it's the right thing to do. And I have faith that if we support our communities are going to support us. So I guess that would be my take on it. What about you, T?
I think people want to help their communities grow. I think as individuals, we're seeing kind of a shift back to local, supporting local community, buying local. I think we're starting to understand how we maybe have hurt our local communities by buying from big chain retailers and getting the face back with the products we're purchasing. Like Coley said, we've got this program out there. We don't even necessarily advertise it, but people are so interested in being a part of it, and they reach out to find out what they can do. So much so that we actually had to create a tab in our online store that people can purchase milk straight for donation. So I think if you can, just to echo what Coley said, as long as you can go out on that limb and create a avenue for people to support the local community, I think people want to. And then just, making people aware that those channels are there. But again, not like Coley said, not gloating about it or not forcing it in any way. And for the most part, I think, again, people just want to help the local community succeed.
Yeah. And on the logistics, like who we're giving to, we identified pretty quickly some local food banks near us that it just fit with us to donate to because of the quantity we were donating, or they were within our delivery route. So I think it's also identifying that partnership of who you are donating to and where it is doing the most good.
That makes sense. And I'm hearing a lot about creating opportunities and working within your local communities and creating those partnerships. Senator Hashmi and Delegate Gudaitis, both of you have urban and rural localities within your districts, which are very different. Regarding the concepts that we've talked about today, what are some challenges you think that are associated with each? And do you see any opportunities to make those connections between these different parts of your district?
Well, that's a great question. And I just want to thank Cooley and TR also for the tremendous work, and what they said about community is just, it touches the heart of what we're talking about today. And really, these are our neighbors. These are our families that we are all concerned with. And so when I in particular am thinking about my district, which extends from a good west end portion or east end portion of Richmond City all the way through Powhatan County, it can take an hour for me to drive from one end of the district to the other. But a lot of times we think that there's just a wide disparity between our urban residents and our folks who live in the rural communities. But in reality, the crisis points and the concerns and issues are the same in many, many ways. And so when I'm thinking about my district in particular and the folks that need the kind of support and resources, they're essentially the same. So we've got tremendous needs for instance, broadband support, which is going to tremendously change the way in which opportunities and resources are able to support so many people in our communities, whether they live in the city or in the rural area. So whether it's broadband for the underserved or the unserved, that is an essential utility at this point. Similarly, we've got food deserts in our rural regions as well as in our cities, and addressing those concerns are going to be consistent and the same for all of us. Everybody in our areas need increased access to health care. We need real economic development for these localities. We need to expand educational opportunities. So I see so many more similarities than I do distinctions or points of difference between the breadth of the districts that we have. And I think addressing those fundamental concerns that impact all of our folks is the direction we have to be going in.
Excellent. Delegate Gudaitis, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, so in the urban areas, everybody loves the farm markets. I adore them. But as strange as it seems, there aren't necessarily farm markets out in the rural areas. So where I grew up, everybody had just a little farm stand, and there was just a mayonnaise jar that you put your money in. You just took the squash and the corn and you put the money in, and the world's not like that so much anymore. So for the rural areas, one of the obstacles for farmers to get their product out is, how do I produce it in such a way? How do I package it in such a way to get it out to people? And so one of the things that I was really proud to do this year was to work on the bill that established the local food and farming infrastructure grant program. And those are $25,000 grants that are hopefully going to support infrastructure development projects to support local food production and sustainable farming. If the pandemic taught us anything about our supply chains, it taught us that we better beef up our local supply chains, and we better support our local supply chains. And that, as vice chair of ag, as a lifelong countrywoman, that to me means support the farmers, support the people who feed us. And so I'm really hoping that these infrastructure grants help that farmer who, I don't know, wants to bake goods from the fresh fruit on her farm, or the farmer who wants to, package produce in such a way that it can travel and go places and be sold to people who are not in their immediate neighborhood. So I think that was a really great thing. That's going to help the people in the urban areas get access to that wonderful food. It's going to help the farmers in the rural areas by supporting them in ways to get that out to the market. So that's something that I hope will work.
I'm really glad, Delegate Gaditis, both you and Senator Hashmi kind of took a step back and looked at the bigger picture of all of this and more of a holistic approach to tackling some of these issues, because it's obviously not quite as simple as, okay, let's get food in the hands of people who need it. If that was the answer, we'd had that done by now, but it's obviously not quite that simple. So I'm glad y'all brought us to that perspective. And speaking of that, and Eddie, please jump in on this as well. We've talked about how we need to bring in people for infrastructure. We've heard from the farmers' perspective, and Eddie, you've mentioned how it's more difficult to get those fresh products to food banks, and how everyone's very easy to donate canned goods. What can someone who's not a farmer, who may be on this, what can they do to support those efforts to get that fresh produce into those hands of people who need it?
Yeah, there's all kinds of opportunities. Chances are you live in a community where there's a pantry that is in need of volunteers, is in need of monetary support. So many of our pantries run on, shoestring budgets at best. Very little space to have the actual refrigeration needed to. So, even if food banks are bringing in 10 million more pounds of produce and hundreds of thousands of gallons of more milk, if we don't have the infrastructure to distribute it out, the local pantry access points, then it doesn't do anybody any good. So food banks would love your support. You can, again, go to our website, vafoodbanks.org, and learn which food bank serves your community. You can learn about some of the programs we offer. And of course, that your financial support, because of our purchasing power, goes a lot further at food banks than it would if you go to a grocery store and buy food to donate. So that's something I always like to emphasize. But chances are you can make a big impact in your community. And if you are part of the farming community, I think it's worth having that conversation about, what would it take to get more of this product to your local pantry, because that tight little network in these local communities can have a huge impact. Wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you for those takeaways. I think it's always great after these discussions for us to have some action items of what we can do to follow up and help. And so, Coley, appreciate you and TR giving the farmer perspective of how people involved in agriculture can become even more involved in these issues. And obviously the Richlands story is such an incredible story. And we loved hearing that at the beginning. And I think we're going to have a part 2 to this webinar to hear how everything's going and have everyone back on to talk about even more efforts and more steps that we can all take. So I really greatly appreciate everyone's time here tonight and the perspectives that you all brought here to this panel. We have just a few minutes left, and I know, Senator Hashmi, you have another engagement right after, so if you have to drop off, we understand. We appreciate you fitting it in here tonight. We do have time for a couple of questions, so if everyone's willing to hang on for just a couple minutes, we'll answer some questions from our audience here, and We'll start off with one.
Actually, Stephanie, can I say one thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
I would be remiss if I did not mention, as far as making the step from, okay, how do we package? So we actually, I'm going to put a plug in for Farm Bureau here. There's a program that you can access through Virginia Farm Bureau, Virginia Fairs, that will help you develop. You have to answer a questionnaire, but they'll help you develop a feasibility study to come up with packaging and direct marketing, as well as a not marketing plan, but a business plan. And then they will help you apply for USDA value-added producer grant that you can get upwards of $250,000 through a matching grant. And we worked with Virginia Fairs and were fortunate enough to get one of those USDA value-added producer grants. And that helped out tremendously with taking it from that raw farm product that you can't sell directly to consumers to a product that we could. So if you're a farmer that's trying to figure out that piece of the puzzle, I would start with Virginia Fairs through Farm Bureau.
Great. Thank you for plugging that resource. That's awesome. And thank you for stopping me, because I did intend to give everyone a chance. If there's anything, any last follow-up or anything that we didn't cover that you want to say before we move on to questions. So anyone, please feel free to jump in at this point.
Well, I have something really important to say, which is, while we've been doing this, I looked up where Richland is and how far away it is for me to go get some ice cream there. It's quite a hike, but I'm going to get there this year.
Wonderful. Thank you, Senator Hashmi. We appreciate it. Have a great night. So one question here, we're going to put, I think now, Coley and Delegate Goditis on the spot here. Do we have questions from our audience? What do the dairy farmers need most from our state legislators in order to continue doing good things for the community?
I'm actually going to kick that over to TR because he runs the dairy.
It's such a complicated puzzle. I mean, the last 3 years have been so incredibly difficult because of international policies and politics, as far as trade internationally has affected milk prices domestically, and of course everything trickles down to the farm eventually. As far as policy that can actually help and aid farmers, the improvements to the milk loss programs, where milk is parity along feed, that was a tremendous step forward in the right direction as far as protecting farmers from increases in feed price with decreases in milk price, which is what we're seeing right now today. I mean, feed prices have doubled in the last few months, while milk price has actually gone down. And so those programs have kicked in. But even just a bill we had an opportunity to pass last year on calling fluid milk versus anything squeezed from a nut milk, which made it a fairly long ways, and I think ultimately got vetoed by the governor, if I'm not mistaken. Policies like that help put good information out there. They're essential. When we talk about fluid milk and its ability to be a complete food source versus some alternatives, we need to really have good education in the classroom for people to understand what they're choosing. And I'm not trying to put any kind of knock on alternative milk products, but the misinformation that's surrounded milk and dairy over the last 2 decades is a lot of it is just no real education in the classroom from kindergarten through 12. I mean, you get out of high school knowing calculus, but you don't get out of high school knowing where food comes from. There's a statistic that I keep in my pocket for giving tours and stuff, and there is a percentage of the population that actually believes food is produced in the grocery store. And it's an amazingly high percentage, even though I think it's around 10 to 12% of people questioned believe that food is actually produced in the grocery store. And that number should be zero. It should always be zero. People should have a basic understanding of where food comes from, how to balance checkbooks, things like that. I think if there's ways to implement that into the classroom, make sure that people understand not just local markets and local economics, but also how it affects macro markets and macroeconomics. Because when we start to lose understanding of what our food supply is and how it works, then our food supply starts to become unstable because we're not supporting it all the way down to the farm level. That would be my best answer as far as a policy, policy standpoint goes.
That's
I would
actually
also
an
say
idea.
get skim milk out of schools. And I know that's more of a federal thing, but you need to be putting whole milk back into schools. And there's plenty of, because skim milk is disgusting. So we've promoted this whole generation of kids who think milk is gross, and it's not. Whole milk is delicious. So get it back in the schools.
So I am interested in the idea of educating people. They're educated, I think, on nutrition. And so take a look at that nutrition curriculum and see what's missing there.
Right.
And would I get the soda out of schools, get the vending machines out of schools? That might not be popular with, maybe I shouldn't say that out loud, but give children the option of milk or a really healthy juice or water. I don't know. Anyway, I probably shouldn't say these things in public, but
no, it's great to say it. And something I actually saw a day or two ago on TikTok, which is one of the social media we use, was a milk vending machine. And people could go up to the vending machine and they could get their pint glass. And then there were flavorings all over the wall. They could get strawberry milk. They could get caramel milk. They could get chocolate milk. And then go up to the vending machine and it dispensed fresh milk with their flavor. And they had 26 flavors of milk right there. And people loved it. And, things like that would go a long ways in schools.
Well, that's a really interesting idea too. And I'd love to know where that machine was.
I have to find that information. I'm not entirely sure.
I think one of the things that really frustrates me is this milk price thing. There's nothing we can do at the state level. It's all federal.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
That's maddening to me. And I'm not going to be able to change that. But in terms of just overarching philosophy, if our farmers aren't making an adequate living, they're going to go do something else.
Well, that's why we've seen a mass exodus. Even in the last 5 years alone, we've trickled from a little over 40,000 to now under 33,000 dairies left in America, and that's less than with a population of 370 million. If I'm not mistaken, I think that's less than 1% of the population now. So that's less than 1% providing a product for 99.9%. That's a scary idea.
And the same is true for so many other farm products.
Yes,
and those farms producing that are far away from where I live. And it's beyond me why, our General Assembly hasn't just really focused on looking after the people who feed us here in Virginia. Every year, I've been through 4 sessions. And in my first session, I pledged that every session I'm there, I'm going to beg from the budget for money for farmland preservation. This year, they finally gave me some, but it's something I'm going to do every year because there's this gap in understanding of priorities. And to me, you guys are our priority.
We definitely appreciate you fighting for the farmers, Delegate Goditis. And well, we're going to have one last question here because I know we're already over, but we've touched on this a little bit at the beginning, talking about the story of Richlands. But briefly, can y'all tell me what has been the biggest challenge during the pandemic for dairy farms?
For dairy farms, oddly enough, I think this is going to sound like a strange answer, but oddly enough, I think one of the things that was hardest for the pandemic to reach as far as normal daily life was actually dairy farmers, because we're so isolated anyways. We have our little pod. we worked so often that we rarely leave the farm. Life for us kind of went on as normal. Now, what happened as far as like a pricing standpoint, when restaurants first closed, the milk price collapsed. I mean, it just, because we lost half the market with the cheese. So that was a big obstacle. And then there were some government purchases that helped bring it back for a little while. And now it's just kind of in limbo. Nobody really seems to know what's going to happen as things start to open back up. It could go any which way. So it's, from a pricing standpoint, I would say the virus has just really, in an already unstable market, it has brought even more instability, if that's even possible. But as far as a daily life standpoint, I wouldn't say that my lifestyle has actually changed that much in the last year. I still go to the same farm. I'm still there 99% of the time. And like I said, it's a strange answer, really.
Thank you. And if you had any questions that didn't get answered, or you simply want to talk to a farmer, get to know some farmers a little bit better, please feel free to follow up, shoot an email to facesofvafarming@vafb.com. We'll drop that in the chat box for you. Don't hesitate to shoot us an email there. And thank you again, a huge thank you to all of our panelists. This was such interesting information, and I think the focus of this initially was farm to food bank efforts, but I love how we pulled in some perspectives from all different issues. I think it was a great overall discussion. So thank you all so much for your time here tonight. Again, for our audience members, this is a brand new webinar series, something we're trying out, so we definitely want your feedback. Tomorrow we'll send out a brief survey email, so if you wouldn't mind taking just a minute or two to complete that so we can work on improving for the next one, we would greatly appreciate that. But thank you all for your time here tonight, and have a great night.